all business owners and people from lots of different walks of life are very control oriented. You only have so much time. You can't control everything. You may not be the best person, and you may not be able to grow yourself, and you may not be able to let others around you grow or the agency grow. I can tell you from a valuation perspective, from the buyer's perspective, if it's all you, then the value is much, much lower because it's all dependent on you.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, we're back with another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zengage. Before we get into this episode, we've recently launched our Scheduler AI, which is a human-in-the-loop, AI-powered scheduling service. We're working with agency owners right now specifically to target after hours and on call. So if that's interesting, drop me a line. You can find me on LinkedIn or wherever. My email is david@zengage.com. Would love to chat more about what we're doing there. But joining the show today is Bruce Vanderlaan. Bruce, for people who aren't familiar with you, how would you introduce yourself?
Thank you, David. Well, if I'm trying to be funny, I like to introduce myself as I'm a lawyer and I'm here to help. The truth of the matter is I've done a lot of different things. The time I started working when I was a kid, I've been a teacher, a teamster, a farmhand, a businessman, and a lawyer now. So I'm kind of like the farm bureau guy. I know a few things because I've seen a few things.
That's good. That's good. Well, we've gotten to know each other over the last year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And one of the things that always stands out to me is I think you do a really excellent job. So many people are thinking, I built this business, like long-term exit strategy, unless they're thinking about some kind of intergenerational transfer. I want the kids to take this thing over. A lot of folks are thinking about an exit strategy and how do I turn this asset that I've built into some money and, exit this business, sell this business. And so you do a really excellent job, I think, of breaking down like, what does a healthy business look like that is going to attract investment and, somebody to acquire this thing?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. We have tried, and I think that comes from that, the experience. I think I did my first transaction in the mid 90s. So it's been a
Yeah.
long time. Like I said, we've seen a lot of things. And I think it's those things. It's not just the pure financial performance or the snapshot where it is today, but it's the growth. It's how you got to where you are. The culture of the agency, the retention of employees, the retention of clients and patients. Those are all important factors, and they really all go into a mix. It's like, in a lot of ways, it's like baking a cake. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily the one thing that makes a difference, but they all make a difference in the end product.
Yeah. So if you've got to kind of, benchmark the metrics of this is an ideal home care agency just from the financial side of things,
Sure.
what does that look like? And then what are some of the maybe like range of outcomes that maybe aren't perfect, but are still good enough for an investor to be interested in?
Yeah, so I think, generally speaking, we want to see an agency that has growth, but not, to the moon growth year over year, month over month, because
Right.
buyers are going to look at that and say that's not really sustainable. But if you've got
Right.
a good, solid, regular growth rate, and then with looking at the agency financials itself, they want to see plus minus a 50% gross margin. So whatever those costs, the cost of the caregivers and the cost to
Yep.
deliver that care to the client, the patient, that cost should be about 50% of that gross revenue. And then getting down to the bottom line, really what we call the adjusted EBITDA. Our mutual friend, Becky Reel's favorite term is EBITDA. So it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Those are some of the things that we add back. And then there are some adjustments. If there are personal expenses that are in the agency, and you've probably heard me talk about some of the crazy things I've seen before. One agency owner that I represented had over $100,000 a year in foreign travel that ran through the agency. And we can adjust for those. And buyers are receptive to that. But when we get down to that adjusted EBITDA margin, the sweet spot really is plus or minus 15%. It could be 13, could be 18, could even be 20. Oddly enough, for some people, if you get over 20%, over say 22, 23, 24%, up in that range, buyers are going to look at that and say, there's something here we don't trust. And it's not that they don't trust the agency owner, it's that they can't sustain it. Maybe the agency owner is doing too much of the work themselves, and so it's not sustainable on an employee basis versus an owner basis. So there is a sweet spot, and in some cases in the marketplace, an agency can be too profitable.
Yeah, makes sense. And so just to kind of bring that home with some quick math, if your bill rate's $40 an hour, as an example, then you want your costs of goods sold, which in this case is primarily tied up in the labor of caregivers and you know payroll tax and benefits and all that kind of stuff. You want that to come out to about $20 an hour. And then you've got your administrative overhead and all those sorts of things. And after all that, taking into account all the different parts of EBITDA, you want the cash flow of the business to be around 15% plus or minus a little bit.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So I run this part of the show called What Kind of Person Are You? And when we were in the prep call, I was like, hey, what are you going to talk about here? And you're like, well, I don't really like talking about myself. I can't relate to that. I love talking about myself. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what kind of person are you?
Yeah, that is very true. I would much rather listen to somebody else than to talk about myself. I've always tried to be a good listener, and so I think that's something that I would tell you about myself. In the best of all worlds, how I describe myself is my daughter's father. I think that's the best thing I've ever done, and that's the best role that I have. I'm fascinated by people's stories. I love to hear about businesses. I love to hear about people, about what makes them tick, what they like to do. I'm truly fascinated by what people have going on in their lives, and love to learn about it.
Yeah, very good. So, Bruce, you're here because you're somebody who's helped a lot of folks exit their business, have had a lot of success with doing these kinds of transactions that a lot of people do maybe once in a lifetime. You've done them a whole bunch. But we're not here to talk about that. Instead, I want to ask you about the big mistake that you made in your career and how that changed the way that you think about your business. So, what's your big mistake?
Oh my goodness. I've made so many, it's tough to choose one or even a couple. As you can imagine, people who know me know that I'm not a young man. So you can imagine not being a young man, being a lawyer for over 30 years, being an investment banker. I've made a few mistakes. But I think the common theme for me, unfortunately, has been an unwillingness to give up control. And I think that is something that has been a mistake for me. I have worked on it and continue to work on it, but I think if you can give up some control, you get the right people. And, I don't think it has to be somebody who has a ton of experience or education in a certain role. It's finding the right people to do what they need to do. We talk about everybody being on the bus, and you want to make sure that everybody is on the bus, and the bus is moving in the right direction. But people don't necessarily need to sit in the seat you assign them, or the same seat for the entire journey. Like I said at the beginning, I've done a lot of things: teacher, teamster, farmhand, businessman, lawyer. Uh, not a doctor or anything else yet, but we'll see. But I think that change is good. For me, change has been energizing. I moved to Florida from Michigan in 2010, moved from a very large law firm in Michigan, started my own practice as solo practitioner in 2010. And then along the way became friends with Corey Mertz, and he convinced me to, as he says, stop standing in the way of deals getting done and help get them done. And every change has been energizing. So I think that's one of the things I would say probably primary in my mind. As I trying to give up that control, having to control everything, because I think you limit yourself.
Yeah. Is there a particular time that you can think of that you realized like, oh, I've been working on this control bug that I have as a person, and I thought I was past this, but oops, it's back again, and I realized that it is impacting my quality of life and business outcomes and all that kind of stuff in a way I don't want it to.
I think there have been transactions where I've been trying to handle all of it. So I'm trying to
Sure.
handle the gathering of all the data. I'm trying to handle the outreach to all of the buyers. I'm trying to and at the same time, maintain good communication with my client and then stop and say, hey, I have a support team. We have great
Yeah.
support people at Merch Tagger, and I just need to leverage that because I get told by Crystal, our administrator, all the time that she's there to help me do these things,
Yeah.
and so I should let her do that.
Yeah. I think like I talk to home care agency owners all the time, and so many of them are control freaks at certain parts of the business, right? Maybe it's the marketing side of the thing, right? I'm the face of the business. I'm going to be out there in the community. They'll bring on a marketer to help them expand their impact, but not be able to hand off the keys to the kingdom to that person to be able to kind of carve their own path and build their own relationships. And they end up kind of just being in the wake. Or it could be the schedule, right? I was talking to somebody the other day and she said, I kept the on call responsibilities nights and weekends for so long. And my latest shift started at 11 p.m. So I was always going to sleep after 11 p.m., had to make sure that caregiver got there. My first shifts in the morning would start at 6 a.m. Like I was up before 6 a.m. to make sure those shifts got off on the right foot. And that kind of thing is what causes business owners to burn out and get jaded. And so, any advice for folks who hear you talking about, I'm kind of a control freak and think, I wish I was a little less of a control freak? Anything you've done, mindset personally or professionally, to, really give yourself the freedom to focus on the stuff only you can do and be able to offload some of the other stuff that other people can do?
Yeah, that is a tough one. Now, this is more do as I say, not as I do, but mindfulness is a big component of it, and practicing. So just like if you're training for, I used to be a runner, and I used to love running and doing races and whatnot. And so training for that race, training yourself with mindfulness, whether it's morning or night, just setting aside some time and saying, okay, what is the thing I want to work on? And what did I do? Or what am I going to do? Whether depending on the time of the day
Mm,
that you're working on it. I think that's probably the biggest thing, just keeping that in mind. And if those things that you repeat, I read somewhere along the way that if you do something for 3 weeks, then it's formed a habit, and you'll be more likely to be able to continue to do that.
sure.
So it's just, if you have to journal it, if you have to put it on your calendar so that you do it, there's a reminder every day. Those are the kind of things that I think are helpful. And it
Yeah.
is, you talk about that control, and I know, all business owners and people from all lots of different walks of life are very control oriented, and we tend to think that we can either we can do it, if you want to get it done right, you do it yourself, and there's truth to that, but it's also there's some falsity to it because you only have so much time.
Yeah.
You can't control everything. You may not be the best person, and you may not be able to grow yourself, and you may not be able to let others around you grow or the agency grow. And I can tell you from a valuation perspective, from the buyer's perspective, if it's all you, then the value is much lower because it's all dependent on you and it can't be
Yeah.
replicated.
Yeah. Well, and this comes back to what you said previously of people get scared off by too good of financial performance because there's some secret sauce that the owner is bringing to bear that if that person's out of the picture, I think that's one of the things when I hear about people who are on the buyer side and what they're evaluating, one of the important things is what is the team like? Because in large part what they are acquiring is the people who run the day-to-day of the business.
Right.
You as the owner, you might stay on for a year or two as part of the agreement, but you're going to ride off into the sunset at some point. And so the question is this whole thing dependent on you, control freaks, or have you empowered folks to take ownership of parts of the business such that short term you can go on vacation
Yeah.
and not have to get your weekend away or your week away interrupted, and long term you're able to you know hand off control of this business to somebody else in exchange for some money.
Yeah. And that has a huge value to be able to
Hmm.
hand that off, to be able to leave and the business continues to run. I've worked with people before who built pretty nice businesses, pretty nice lifestyle businesses. And by that I mean,
Yeah.
they made a nice income, but they weren't killing it, but they had a nice lifestyle as a result of their business.
Yep.
That has value, but it doesn't have the kind of value of, a business where you can step away. And I remember one client of mine, he'd 25 years. He started and run the business, and it was a nice business, but then he decided that it was his children got a little bit older, so they had sports, and he decided he wanted to take a little bit of time away, and he was struggling to do that. But he hired somebody who came in, and it went through the roof. And he,
Yeah.
he joked about how the business was successful because he got out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's every successful business owner I've talked to has had that moment where they realized what they thought they were doing to hold up the business and keep it moving was actually it progressed to a stage where really we just needed the right person to come in and help it scale and grow
Yeah.
and get a fresh set of eyes on it and some renewed energy into the thing. And that kind of hire is hard to make, right? Like they're not just folks that can step in and function like an owner but not be an owner
Yeah.
are few and far between. But finding that kind of person, empowering them, getting out of the way is huge.
Well, and that's what I talk about when I'm talking about people on the bus and being on the right seat. 10, 15 years ago, I wasn't even on the investment banker bus, but
Yeah.
now I am, and I think I'm in the right seat, and
Yeah.
seems to be going well. And before, all the different things that I've done really have led me to this point. So
Yeah.
I don't think that you necessarily have to hire someone who's been an administrator or an assistant administrator to fill the administrative role.
Sure.
You hire people, hire the best people you can get, and then find out the role that they best fit.
It's good. All right, I want to transition now to talking about something that you think is underrated in the industry. Of all the things people are thinking about as it relates to transactions, this one doesn't typically make the top of the list. What is it?
Well, I'm not sure I can limit myself to one, but I'm going to start with
Sure.
culture. Culture, it does get talked about a fair amount more today than it did, even 5 years ago. And it
Yeah.
is very important. One of the best cultures that I've ever seen was a culture where the owner hired people expecting them to leave. She wanted to train
Mm,
them, to help them grow. And when they got to the point in their own personal growth where they had outgrown the agency, she encouraged them to move on. And
mm,
oftentimes they didn't. They didn't want to, but
sure.
but that kind of a culture really creates people who take ownership of their role and help create a better ownership for that agency.
Yeah, I think a lot, and this is something that anytime I hear that somebody is creating a career pathway for great caregivers to find some fit in the office makes me super excited because first of all, like your relationship with your caregivers is going to be better because you've got folks in the office who have experience there and can totally, empathize with what it feels like to go in a brand new client's home
Mhm.
for the first time and not really know what you're getting yourself into until you're there. But I think the other piece of that is there's a symbolic impact of that kind of posture, right? We believe that caregivers can come into the office and do great work. We believe everybody who works here has the ability to grow to the extent that they've, kind of no longer have a place here because they've grown so
Yeah.
much. And you may lose one or two really great people, but you are going to keep folks who this is their dream job. This is what they want to do. It fits their lifestyle, it fits their family, all that. And they're going to be super loyal because they know you're not just looking to use them as a cog in the machine, but you're looking for them to be somebody who can make an impact here and elsewhere and wherever.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. One of the other ones that I think is maybe ironically underrated, at least by agency owners, is sales and marketing. I think that we tend to concentrate more on the caregivers and
Hmm.
more on scheduling and billing, perhaps as administrative tasks. But the people out there, the face of the agency, representing the agency, doing the sales and marketing. Somebody recently said to me that sales cures all ills. It's not quite that
Right.
simple, but
Yeah.
it does help a lot. You certainly you have to be able to manage that. You have to be able to serve the all the new sales that you can get. But it does make a difference. It makes the agency grow, of course, but it makes it a better agency for everybody involved. If you, and that's part of the culture too. You know, if you're thinking about it in terms of we want to provide more services to more people in more areas, we have to have the right people to do that. But
Yeah.
you know, if you're all part of the team, I think that that's an area that I think is ironically underrated because we all talk about sales and
Yeah.
but it maybe it's the way it's done.
Yeah. This is something that I think new owners are acutely aware of, right? You've got 3 clients and at least one of them is kind of the clock is ticking.
Yeah,
We don't keep our clients forever in this business. And so, they're aware I've got to be out there selling and marketing because I've hired these caregivers so that I can staff these shifts that I get through my sales and marketing efforts. But I also have some caregivers right now sitting on the bench and the sand in their hourglass is moving so much quicker, right? If we don't get them to work
yeah,
within a couple of days of orientation, our ability to keep them goes down. But I think as agencies grow and the roller coaster ride of, "Oh, I just lost a third of my hours," becomes, much less tumultuous, it can be easy to focus on one or the other. But we know, there's this bottleneck of I don't have enough caregivers. And so if I got referrals, I'm concerned I wouldn't be able to staff them. That's one challenge that an agency can experience. The other challenge is what's the reason that most turnover happens? Well, I didn't get the schedule that I needed. I didn't get the hours that I needed. And so, I had to go find gig work or go to another agency that did have a schedule for me. And so it's this really challenging balancing act of I've got to do the sales and the marketing activity so that I'm able to put my caregivers to work. But I've got to have enough caregivers that when those sales and marketing efforts pay off, I'm able to staff it. And this is we're 2 guys not in an operating role,
that's right. Yeah,
and so I don't lose sleep over this.
yeah,
But as a new agency owner, you're so aware of this. But I think to your point, it's easy to kind of let the pendulum swing to one side or the other once you're a little bit more established.
yeah. Yeah, and it's something that we've certainly struggled with in the investment banking side.
Sure.
Is you know, you're trying to build that pipeline, then you've got agencies out to market, and that's so busy that you don't have time to build the pipeline. So then
Yep.
you get that transaction done, then you're trying to get more in your pipeline again.
Yep, I know from experience, being in the sales world, the worst thing is staring at an empty calendar. And a lot of times that empty calendar happens because you've had all this activity
Yeah.
that paid off in all these meetings, and you ran all these meetings, and you have all these customers, and then you look at your calendar and you're like, "Oh, I over-indexed on one part of the business, and now I'm paying for it."
Yeah.
Okay, let's transition to talking about something. We talked about a big mistake that you made, but what's a little mistake that you see home care owners make all the time? And if they quit, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
Yeah, a couple of things that occur to me, and I think one really kind of segues right from what we were just talking about, and something that's overrated. I'm sorry, something that is underrated in the industry. The little mistake I would say that most agency owners is not going to conferences. I
Mm,
think conferences are great ways to get good information, to make good contacts, and to help to grow yourself and your agency. You don't have to be looking at growing to a 10 or 20 or $100 million agency, but I think the most agency owners want to grow somewhat. They don't want to stagnate or go backwards. And I think that the reason that segues into from something that's underrated is building those relationships. It is amazing to me how many people, successful people in the home care industry, are willing to help out others,
yeah,
even competitors, even in their same market. There
sure.
are such good, I mean, it is it is a mission driven industry. I think everybody knows that. And that mission really extends to helping other people provide good quality services within the industry.
Mm,
And I think that's something that's a little mistake that's easily rectified. I think going to one or two conferences a year would really help a lot of agency owners.
yeah. Any conferences that you're headed to second half of this year that you're excited about?
Yeah, I love going to ACAOA. It's a great conference. We
Yeah.
we typically do a number of the home healthcare news conferences every
Yep.
year. I think we have a great relationship with George and all the people at HHCN, and they put on great conferences.
Yeah.
So we will be attending conferences there, and NAC is always that we typically do at least one, if not two, of the NAC conferences. I look forward to them, and I look forward to seeing the people that I see year after year, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, is there another little mistake that's top of mind for you?
I think another one would be organization. If you can get, and again, this is do as I say, not as I do. But if you can get organized early, if you're talking about going through a process like we run, the process is a lot of work. It can be a separate full time job. If you can get organized early, and certainly kind of things that anybody like me could help you do, it's going to make an enormous difference in the long run. The process itself typically takes 4 to 6 months, and so if you've got as you're going along those 4 to 6 months, if you can be doing step by step little steps of organization, getting everything ready, getting everything in folders and files and put places, it just makes the whole process so much easier. It makes your life in the process that much easier.
Kind of two follow-up questions there. I think the first is, I assume most people you work with, this is the first time that they've done a transaction like this on the sell side. What should somebody's expectation, if they're at zero today, what should their expectation around timeline be, and how long should they plan for a exit, transaction process to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that everybody who starts a conversation with me wants to know if they're thinking about going out to market. So typically, what I would say, the prototypical situation for us is somebody will want to know their valuation. What is my agency worth? I'm not necessarily ready to go
Yeah,
today or tomorrow or even next year, but what's my valuation? So we do that, and that may take a couple of weeks. Depends on
sure.
how organized they are, and how quickly they can respond to the types of information we need. But that'll take 2 or 3 weeks to gather the information, to put it in what we call a data book. It's a spreadsheet that gives you some guidance on where there may be some expenses that could be right sized, where your revenue is
Yep.
coming from, where the money is going, and where you might be relative to the market in terms of valuation. So that's maybe a 2 to 4 week process. And then let's say that somebody wanted to go from there, say, okay, I think that's what I'm looking to get out of my agency. I'm at that point in my life. I'm ready to make that transition. So there's of course, more information that we would gather, and that probably will take another couple of weeks. It's a deeper dive in a lot of the same information, but
Sure.
it's much more of the story, the background, the milestones, and we're going to look at a bigger picture of the area, the geography where they are, what the
Right.
opportunity is. And so that process is going to take another probably 2 to 4 weeks to gather the information,
Yeah.
maybe let's say maybe 4 to 6 weeks from the end of that valuation process to gather that information and put together the sim, confidential information memorandum, the book on the business, and
Yeah.
go out to market. So now we're somewhere between 2 to 3 months into the process,
Yep.
and then it's going to be another roughly 4 to 6 weeks of marketing the agency to the right buyers, and then getting those letters of intent in for the agency owner to evaluate and make a decision as who they would want to go exclusive with. And then you've got, depending on the buyer, you've got anywhere from 45 days. I've seen as low as 30 days, but
Sure.
more typically, I would say 60 to 90 days of due diligence and questions, meetings, kind of you know, almost a discovery of what the financials, compliance, labor and employment, legal, all of that stuff that a buyer is going to want to know and understand and get documentation of.
Yeah.
So we could be talking anywhere between, we say typically it's 4 to 6 weeks, or I'm sorry, 4 to 6 months
Yeah.
for a process to run from the time that we get out to market to the time that it closes. They've negotiated a purchase agreement and employment agreements if they're going to continue in employment.
Sure.
The shortest I think I've ever seen probably was about 2.5 months. It was that today I think is unheard of.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But it could, theoretically, it could happen. I've had other, the longest I think process we took. Well, not counting the ones that for other reasons did not close. The longest process from really beginning to close probably took about 13 months.
Yeah. It's craziness.
Yeah.
Are there any kind of blind spots that are top of mind? Like if somebody's thinking, okay, where do I get organized first? These are things buyers always care about that sellers almost always forget.
Yeah. So financials first. That's the thing that buyers are always going to look at first. So, have your profit and loss statement and your balance sheets. That's fairly easy. Most everybody's on QuickBooks or something like QuickBooks, but know what your adjustments are. Know what either one-time expenses, like if you had a bad rainstorm and the roof failed on your office, but you're responsible to pay for it. So that's a one-time expense. That's a non-operational expense. That's going to get added back if you're running vacations through the agency. Just identify them and be able to show this is what that is. That is actually personal expense. It's not that buyers won't add that back or don't trust that. They just want proof that that's personal, that it's not an operational expense. So that's where we always start, depending on the state, the agency, the type of services. Compliance is another one that you have your documentation, make sure it's all done and it's all readily available. Along with those, the financial should back up a little bit. Gather your bank statements. That's something that you need to go back month by month over 3 years before you go to market. And sometimes some banks, those bank statements are not easily available going back that far. So if you start to get organized, get your bank statements in order. That's one that just gathering information. Your legal structure. If you're a corporation, make sure that you've got your paperwork, all of your meetings and minutes in order. Putting on my lawyer hat for a moment, I've had to go back and quote unquote recreate annual meeting minutes for agencies. It's something that's regularly done. It's not a big deal, but it's formal documentation. Those kinds of things, have a review with a labor and employment lawyer. Make sure that your policies and procedures are in place and they're appropriate.
Right. Very good. Okay. We talked about a lot of mistakes that people have made, but I like to end every episode on a high note. So I want to hear about something that's happened lately in your business that you're proud of.
Well, we talked about this before, and I think that strangely enough, it seems to have fallen to me to be the guy who helps out with the difficult ones. I don't know if it's because I'm a lawyer as well as an investment banker, but I've had a number of situations where clients have come to me and they are in active disputes, in some cases, active litigation. They're suing their partners and partners are
Right.
suing them. And I've even had situations where I have had agencies under investigation by state or federal governmental entities, and in those circumstances, we did not believe that there was any validity to it. But
Yeah.
when you have the full weight of the government pressing down on you, there's not a lot you can do. And what I would say, I guess, a success for myself is that I've been able to successfully guide those agencies to a successful close and transaction.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. Before we get out of here, what do you want to plug?
I'm trying to give this a fair amount of thought since we talked about it. And what I really like to do is plug the industry as a whole. I think that this, like I said, this is a mission driven business. And when I was a kid, my mom was a nurse, and I've been fortunate to um to have always had strong women in my life. And she was a I would say she was a lady boss before there was such a thing. She was the director of a assisted living facility way back in the 1970s. And um and she but since she went on to become a hospice nurse and a home health nurse, and I know I know from my work as an investment banker at Mercer Taggart, I know from contacts that I've had, I know from the fact that my parents are elderly, they're now in their 80s and 90s, and I know from my mom working as a nurse in the industry what it takes and the mission. And I guess I would just say, talk to people, let them know what the mission is, and you know, there should be a lot of support for this mission out in the world.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, great note to end on. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. Had a great time.
All right, thanks, David. Good to talk with you again, as always.
On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.
The best is yet